Welcome to Through the Eyes of the Youth, Life and Death in the Benjin Ghetto exhibit. We're going to examine the lives of 7 youth as they experienced life before the war, during the war, and then afterwards. We'll follow their stories and see what happened to them in Benjin, Poland, a town of 50,000 people, 25,000 Catholics, 25,000 Jews who lived in harmony prior to the Nazi invasion.
So the Benjin exhibit at the beginning on the first panel shows the geography of the land. So if you look on that first panel, it's got the geography showing the location of Benjin. Benjin is right near the German border, which is why it is nearly invaded right after the initial invasion. The next 2 panels show some of the stories and bits of the biographies from the 7 youth. This is all from prior to the war. So you have a picture of Arnold Shea, who is my favorite out of he's the one that I desired the most when researching. He has something that just draws attention and kind of connects him to modern day, which allows you to connect to something that oftentimes is seen as so far from the past. It talks about, on the first panel, education, family, and faith, 3 things that they believed in dearly. They have something like musical bands on that first exhibit of education, family, and how it united them in times of tyranny and distress, along with faith. Faith is a big part that played a role as they all united, regardless of what degree of religion that they practiced. They all united, and they all united at the synagogue, which was in Benjin, and it's actually a place that is now at the scene of where the invasion hits heavy on that next second panel.
This section of the exhibit covers the occupation and ghettoization of Benjin as the Nazis move in. It covers 1939 to 1941. We start with the occupation of Benjin, a common tactic used by the Nazis when they went to Polish towns was to take Jewish leaders, men specifically, and other men who would have supported members within the Jewish community, to round them up and put them into the local synagogue and then light it on fire, killing all of the men and burning down the synagogue. And we just see a depiction of that from Ella Lieberman, one of the women that's a part of this exhibit. Then we move on to the restrictions. Nothing happens suddenly, right? So there's a slow buildup of restrictions on the Jewish communities, and it all starts very slow until, of course, the end of the war. Then you have systems like the Judenrat, which are put in place to control the Jewish populace. The Judenrat was a Jewish council assembled by the Nazis. They would pick out members from the Jewish community and put them onto this council, and then give them directions as to what they wanted them to do with the Jewish populace in any given town. Then we have resettlement. Slowly but surely the Nazis start to condense more and more Jewish people into a smaller and smaller area until we get the ghettos. That's why this section covers the ghettoization, because this is the start of that condensing. Then you have work life. Again, restrictions, of course, had an effect on work life. There were 2 factories within Benjin. Both of them come to be owned by German men who employed Jewish workers for below what they deserved wages. And so that's a big part of the occupation and ghettoization of Benjin. And then, of course, there's just daily life. As a member of the Jewish community at this time, you wouldn't have been allowed access to certain things that non-Jewish members of the community would have had access to, including doctors. Jewish doctors were not allowed to work on non-Jewish patients. They were only allowed to work on other Jewish patients as a part of those restrictions. So those are just the little ways that this affects daily life.
So this section is on the ghetto life and deportations in the Benjin ghetto. The first panel is the relocation to Kamionka, which was an open ghetto just outside of town. And this meant that it didn't have any walls, but people commonly mistake that to mean that the Jewish population could move inside and outside of the open ghetto, but it was guarded by Germans. Then we go into further restrictions. The further restrictions included the Jewish population not being able to own stores. They were moved out of their houses, and they had to get special identification paperwork. One of the interesting things about the identification paperwork, which you can see here, is that all of the boys or men's middle names were changed to Israel to further identify them as Jewish. And one of the really cool things or interesting things about this exhibit is that we see a lot of resilience through the artwork and the pictures. This is Hadassah Broder and her husband. They met and fell in love in the ghetto. They got married in the ghetto. They had a child in the ghetto. And then we also see forms of resistance. So these are Jewish young adults who are reading and studying, which they were not allowed to do under Nazi rule. Then there is selections and deportations. Selections and deportations were when the Jewish population was rounded up and put into, in the case of Benjin, a soccer stadium, and then they split up families, sending them to Auschwitz or to labor camps, or they'd be able to stay there. Unfortunately, they were not all able, or no Jewish population was able to remain in Benjin. This occurred through a process of liquidation. Liquidation was when the Germans rounded up any remaining Jews and sent them to Auschwitz or a labor camp. And then Benjin was declared Judenfrei, which means free of Jews.
So this last section covers Auschwitz, where two young women from Benjin helped blow up crematorium. They were subsequently murdered for that, but they were very, the town likes to share that. And then we have liberation. Unfortunately, not all of our 7 made it. Hadassah and Rutger were murdered in the camps. Hadassah we lost track of once she boarded a train to Auschwitz, so we're not sure what happened to her, but she did not survive. And then the town of Benjin today, it still impacts the youth. They did a reenactment. They felt so passionately about sharing the history of the town and what had been done to the Jewish population. Then we come over here and we have New Lives, where they ended up. Doris on the top and Jane on the bottom have Arizona connections. Doris was up in Flagstaff, founded the Martin Springer Institute at NAU. Jane was down in Tucson before their deaths. A memorial in the town of Benjin to the Jews who were murdered. And then our final picture. This is Rose. Rose survived. She's the only one from her family. She's the only one in this picture that survived the camps and the Holocaust, and they are the reason that we do this. They are the reason that we tell their stories. So we remember them, we remember their names, we remember that we can't do this again. We can't let it happen again.